I was halfway through changing my truck's brake pads when I found the envelope taped to my front door again. Thick, official-looking HOA letterhead. I peeled it off the glass, already knowing I wasn't going to like what was inside. Violation notice. Damaged shared property gate replacement fee, $2,487.92. I read it twice. Then once more, slower this time. What gate? I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in Oak Ridge Pines, one of those neighborhoods where the HOA thinks they're running a gated community in Beverly Hills. We've got a rickety swing gate at the entrance, more decorative than anything that creaks like an old barn door every time it opens. It's been there since the early 2000s, probably hasn't seen a proper maintenance check in years. I walked over to the entrance. Sure enough, the left side of the gate was bent inward like someone had rammed it. The post was cracked and the motor casing was dented in. The HOA claimed it was me, said my truck matched the damage profile. Whatever that meant, that's when I saw her, Nancy Overton, HOA president. Platinum blonde bob, pink athletic wear, and the expression of someone who just walked into a gas station bathroom and blamed it on society. She was already waiting by the gate like some kind of self-appointed gatekeeper, clipboard in hand. Ah, good. You got the notice, she said without looking up. What the hell is this? I lifted the letter. You hit the gate, Mr. Abbott, or someone in your household did. We reviewed the damage and it lines up with your vehicle. The board voted and you're responsible. I laughed. You think I crashed into a gate and didn't notice? That thing's built like a dumpster. Nancy pursed her lips. There's no need to get defensive. You can appeal, of course, but that will delay things. And we need the funds to repair it immediately. I stared at her, trying to figure out what her angle was. Nancy had always had it out for me ever since I skipped one HOA meeting to take my nephew to a baseball game. She called it a dereliction of neighborly duty. I called it Saturday. I didn't hit anything, I said, and you're not getting a dime unless you've got proof, real proof. We have tire marks and a broken reflector, she said smugly. It's enough. I turned around without another word and walked back to my driveway. She followed me halfway, still yapping about community standards. What she didn't know, what no one in this neighborhood knew, was that I'd just installed a new dashcam in my truck. High-res, night vision, continuous loop. My younger brother had given it to me after I caught someone egging my garage last Halloween. It had been recording every second since. I opened the dashcam footage on my laptop that night, fast-forwarding through hours of nothing. Then I hit the jackpot. 2 nights ago, 2:12 in the morning. There she was, a white Lexus SUV swerving slightly. The headlights bounced as it clipped the edge of the gate. The metal crumpled like paper. The vehicle stopped for a second, then slowly reversed and drove off. I zoomed in on the plates. HOA One Love. Nancy's vanity plate. Oh, this was gonna be good. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office wearing my oldest work boots, still dusted in brake pad grime. The place was tucked behind the clubhouse, wedged between the community pool entrance, and a storage closet filled with faded holiday decorations and broken folding chairs. There was one desk, one chair, and one very surprised-looking assistant sipping coffee behind a monitor that had no business being that dusty. I need to speak with Nancy, I said. She's in a board meeting, the assistant replied without looking up. I slid a USB drive across the desk. Then make sure she gets this, and tell her she has until 5 p.m. today to retract the fine and issue a written apology, or I go public. The assistant's eyes finally left the screen. What is this? Proof, I said. And a very expensive mistake. I turned and walked out, leaving the air thick enough to chew. By the time I got home, I could already feel the tension building. 3 neighbors on my street were out front, pretending to water their lawns while obviously watching me. Word traveled fast in Oak Ridge Pines. By lunch, it would spread to the dog park, and by this evening, someone's aunt in Florida would know I'd challenged the HOA. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Twice. On the 3rd try, I picked up. "You've made your point," Nancy said, her voice clipped and overly formal, like she was trying to sound composed while sitting on a keg of dynamite. "Not yet, I haven't," I replied. "You're trying to stick me with a bill for something you did. You really thought no one would catch it? There must be a mistake." "No, there isn't. You hit the gate, you backed up, you drove off. I've got the plate and timestamp. The footage is clear." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Drop the fine. Issue a public retraction. Apologize and tell the rest of the board." "That's a lot, Mr. Abbott. Not as much as what I'll do if I file a police report for property damage and attempted fraud." Another pause. Then the line went dead. I wasn't bluffing. I'd already made a copy of the footage and sent it to my cousin, who worked in the city attorney's office. He called me back that evening. "Yeah, that's pretty damning," he said. "If she tried to pin this on you, that's not just shady, that's criminal. You could take it to small claims or push it higher. Depends how far you want to go." I did want to go further, but I wanted to see how she'd respond first. At 6:15, I heard a knock. I opened the door to find Nancy standing there. No clipboard, no smugness, just a forced calm and the HOA vice president, Ron, standing behind her. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I'd like to speak with you privately," she said. "Nope." "Say whatever you need to say right here." Ron scratched the back of his neck. "We reviewed the video. It's clear. The fine was issued in error. We're formally retracting it and covering the repair costs ourselves." And Nancy's jaw clenched. "I apologize for the inconvenience." I crossed my arms. "That's not an apology. That's what people say when their printer jams." She stared at me, then looked at Ron, who gave the slightest nod. "I apologize for wrongly accusing you of damaging HOA property. It was a mistake, and I take full responsibility." I let the silence hang a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "Good. Now one more thing. You're going to inform the entire board of what happened, in writing." She looked like she'd bitten into a lemon, but she agreed. They walked off, and I watched them go. But I wasn't done. The next day, I filed a report with the county sheriff's office. I didn't want jail time or a lawsuit. I wanted documentation. I wanted a record that showed this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to shift blame and stick a neighbor with a multi-thousand-dollar repair. At the station, the deputy asked to see the footage. I showed him. He raised his eyebrows, then whistled low. "Yeah, that's a hit and run on private property," he said. "You said she sent you a bill for it." I handed over the HOA letter. He leaned back. "That's not just shady. That's attempted fraud. We'll document it and forward it to the DA. Don't expect handcuffs, but this won't go away quietly." By the following week, something incredible happened. A new letter arrived not from the HOA, but from the city. Apparently, the HOA had been using unlicensed contractors for years, including the one they planned to use to fix the gate. My cousin had forwarded the dashcam footage to a friend in municipal code enforcement, who decided to take a closer look. Turns out, the HOA hadn't pulled permits for half their so-called improvements in the past 5 years. The cracked sidewalks, the failing drainage system near Lot 23, even the community garden fencing, none of it had proper inspections. And now the city wanted to see every record, every receipt, and every contractor license the HOA had on file. I didn't have to do anything else. The fire had already caught. The next board meeting was packed. I hadn't seen that many people in the clubhouse since the 4th of July cookout where someone lit fireworks near the propane tank. Nancy took her seat at the head of the table, flanked by the rest of the board. She looked tired. There was a paper cup of coffee in front of her and a stack of folders she hadn't opened. The first 10 minutes were pure chaos, residents demanding answers, accusations flying, someone asking if they could sue the board. I waited until the room quieted. Then I stood. "Just one question," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why did the HOA president attempt to fine a resident for damage she caused herself?" Gasps, whispers. Some people turned to Nancy, others just stared at me. "She watched the footage," I continued. "She drove into the gate. She backed up and left. And then she sent me a bill for nearly $2,500. Nancy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A woman near the back raised her hand. Is that true? Ron stood. Yes, it is, and she's apologized, but there's more. We're under review for multiple code violations from the city. Effective immediately, the board is suspending all discretionary spending and forming a resident oversight committee. That was the first smart thing I'd heard from any of them since I moved in. Nancy didn't return to the next board meeting. She resigned 2 days later, citing personal stress. Ron took her place temporarily, but the real power shifted to the residents, who were suddenly very interested in how things were run. Within a month, the HOA bylaws were amended. Fines required photographic evidence. All major expenses had to be voted on by at least 60% of the residents. And the best part? Every board meeting had to be recorded and made publicly available within 72 hours. I never got reimbursed for the brake pads I didn't finish installing that day, but I got something better: accountability. And a neighborhood that finally remembered who it really belonged to: us. 2 weeks after Nancy's resignation, I was dragging my garbage bin to the curb when a black SUV pulled up in front of my house, no HOA vanity plate this time. A man in a dark blazer stepped out, clipboard under one arm, and introduced himself as Detective Carl Dorsey with the county's Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the Oak Ridge Pines HOA, he said, glancing down at his clipboard. Specifically regarding a repair invoice and a letter you received. I gestured toward my porch. We can talk out here unless you need to see the video. I'll get to that, he said, flipping a page. We received a formal complaint through the city attorney's office, along with evidence that suggests this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or negligence. There are signs of systematic financial misreporting. That caught my attention. Misreporting. From what? One fake fine? He shook his head. No, it goes deeper. Someone on the board's been submitting duplicate repair invoices for the same maintenance jobs. The gate fix was just the tip. I leaned on the porch railing. You telling me they've been double billing? He nodded. In some cases, triple. Same gate, same contractor, 3 separate payments logged under different budget categories, and that's just what we found in the last fiscal year. I crossed my arms, the full weight of what that meant settling in. So what happens now? We've issued subpoenas for the HOA's financial records going back 5 years. We're also looking into the contractor. They've been funneling most of the repair work through a company called Precision Grounds. Ever heard of them? I hadn't, but the name rang a bell. I walked into my garage and pulled a copy of the last HOA newsletter from the recycling bin. Right there in the maintenance update section. Gate repairs completed by Precision Grounds following unfortunate damage incident. I handed it to Dorsey. They're practically advertising the fraud. He nodded again. That's helpful. We're trying to determine whether this was just a few board members or if the contractor was also in on it. If it's the latter, we're looking at conspiracy and wire fraud charges. He left with a copy of the dashcam footage and a scanned version of the invoice they'd tried to stick me with. I didn't hear from him for another week, but when I did, everything changed. It was just after sunset when I noticed a white, unmarked van parked outside the HOA office. 2 men in windbreakers were loading box after box of documents into the back. A third emerged with a laptop tucked under his arm. That same night, an emergency HOA meeting was called not by the board, but by a group of residents who'd formed an ad hoc oversight committee. I showed up to find folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder in the clubhouse. Every face looked tired but alert, like people who'd finally sat up after sleeping through years of nonsense. Ron stood near the front, trying to keep order. Let's stay civil, everyone, he said, though it was clear even he didn't know what was coming next. A woman in a red sweater stood up from the 4th row. My name is Deanne. I reviewed the last 3 years of budget allocations. Over 70% of our emergency maintenance funds went to precision grounds. That's over $90,000. There were audible gasps. And the kicker, she continued. I called the contractor. They've only done 4 actual jobs here in that time. The rest, they say they never billed us for. Ron looked like someone had unplugged him. He sat down without a word. Another man stood. I'm from lot 35. Last year, I got fined for an unauthorized structure because I installed a shed in my backyard. Turns out, the HOA charged me a review fee that doesn't even exist in the bylaws. And where did that check go? It wasn't deposited in the HOA operating account. I raised my hand and stood. Last month, they tried to bill me for that busted gate, said I hit it with my truck. I had dashcam footage showing Nancy Overton hit it herself at 2 in the morning. She backed up and left like nothing happened. Then they tried to stick me with the bill. That's when I started digging. The room broke into murmurs again, louder this time, some shocked, some furious. I sent that footage to the city attorney, I said, and now the police are involved. This isn't mismanagement, it's fraud. Deanne raised another stack of papers. The HOA has been moving funds through a shell account under the name ORP Community Enrichment Fund. It's not listed in any of the official documents, but I followed the paper trail. That account is registered to Nancy Overton personally. That was it. The room exploded. People shouted over each other. Someone slammed their hand on a folding table. Another yelled, "Where's our money, Nancy?" It took nearly 10 minutes to restore calm, and by then, everyone knew what had to happen. A formal petition to dissolve the current HOA board was passed around. By the end of the night, over 80% of residents had signed it. A special election was scheduled for the following week, and 3 new candidates stepped forward, none of whom had ever served on the board before. 2 days later, Nancy was arrested at her home. No press. No spectacle. Just a quiet knock, a pair of handcuffs, and a county cruiser pulling away from her driveway at dawn. Someone caught a photo and posted it to the neighborhood forum. It was taken down within the hour, but not before half the community saved it. The charges: wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying financial records, and obstruction of a municipal audit. The DA's office tacked on conspiracy and misappropriation of community funds. If convicted, she was looking at over 15 years. Ron resigned before his name could be dragged through the mud. His replacement: Deanne, the woman in the red sweater, now elected interim president by unanimous vote. Under her leadership, the new board hired a third-party forensic accountant to comb through every line of the HOA's finances. The report was brutal. Nearly $120,000 unaccounted for over 4 years. And that didn't even include the unauthorized fees levied on residents. Everyone who had been fined without cause was refunded. Every resident forced to pay a fabricated review fee or expedited processing charge got their money back. And for the first time in the HOA's 20-year history, a full financial audit was posted online for all residents to review. I didn't run for office. I didn't need to. I got what I came for. Truth, justice, and a community that finally woke up from its slumber. The gate still creaks when it opens. But now it's got a new motor, properly installed with a permit number and receipt attached to the bulletin board by the clubhouse door. Sometimes when I drive past it, I slow down just enough to let the dashcam catch it, just in case. The following Friday, I found myself standing in the corridor of the county courthouse, leaning against a vending machine that only accepted quarters and holding a manila folder that had started this whole mess. I wasn't there as a complainant anymore. The city had taken over, with the DA filing criminal charges that went far beyond my gate incident. Still, I'd been subpoenaed to testify as a witness in the preliminary hearing. The folder in my hands held 2 things: a printed screenshot of Nancy's license plate captured by my dashcam and a notarized copy of the HOA invoice addressed to me. Both had already been entered into evidence, but I brought extras. I didn't trust the system to be as thorough as I'd had to be. When the bailiff called my name, I stepped into the courtroom. The place was smaller than I expected. No gallery, no theatrics. Just a judge at the bench, a prosecutor flipping through notes, and Nancy seated at the defendant's table with an attorney so polished he probably charged by the breath. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said as I took the stand. "Mark Abbott," I replied. Every word after that was deliberate. I walked them through the timeline, the bogus invoice, the dashcam footage, the confrontation, and the fallout. I stopped short of editorializing. The prosecutor didn't need drama, he had documents, timestamps, and a video that left no room for interpretation. Nancy's attorney tried to poke holes. He asked if I'd ever had conflicts with his client before. I said I didn't join HOA meetings regularly, but I'd never had personal issues with her beyond this incident. He asked if I had tampered with the footage. I reminded him the original file was sent directly to the city attorney's office the same day I discovered it. The judge didn't interrupt once, but I caught him scribbling notes when the prosecutor introduced the evidence of duplicate billing 3 separate payments made to the same contractor for the same gate repair. Each one categorized under a different line item: property maintenance, emergency infrastructure, and, bizarrely, community enrichment. When I stepped down, I took a seat near the back and watched as witnesses came forward one by one. A former HOA treasurer testified that Nancy had insisted on exclusive control of expenditure approvals, despite bylaws requiring dual signatures. A resident who worked in IT explained how he'd traced one of the shell accounts, used to move funds around an account, linked directly to a prepaid debit card registered under Nancy's maiden name. Then came the contractor. He was a balding man with oil-stained hands and a voice like gravel. He testified that he'd only repaired the gate once, was paid in cash, and never submitted multiple invoices. "I thought it was odd," he admitted, "but she told me the board was splitting the cost between budget categories to maximize efficiency. I fix fences, not books." By the end of the hearing, the judge didn't even hesitate. "Probable cause has been clearly established," he said. "The defendant will be held for trial on all counts." Nancy didn't look up when they cuffed her. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she nodded once. I watched her being led out of the courtroom, her designer heels clacking against the floor in sharp contrast to the silence that followed. Back in Oak Ridge Pines, the mood had shifted. The clubhouse, once a symbol of HOA control, became the nerve center of a reborn neighborhood council. Deanne and the Oversight Committee launched what they called the Transparency Initiative, a public audit of every past project, vendor, and fee going back 10 years. They uncovered more than just financial fraud. One file contained records of surveillance cameras that had been installed without resident consent, hidden near the dog park, the tennis courts, even outside private homes. Nancy had claimed they were for security monitoring, but there were no signs, no disclosures, and no board approvals. The footage had been stored on an encrypted drive found in the HOA office, accessible only by her credentials. That discovery triggered a second investigation, this time by the state attorney general's office. The AGS team arrived the following week, escorted by uniformed officers and a forensic tech unit. They seized hard drives, backups, and every HOA-issued laptop. Residents watched from their porches as evidence bags were loaded into vans. Almost no one spoke. The silence wasn't fear, it was gravity. People finally understood this hadn't been about a gate. It had been about power, unchecked and weaponized. 3 former board members were called in for questioning. 2 cooperated immediately and turned over documents Nancy had asked them to sign blindly. The third, a man named Victor, lawyered up and refused to speak. That didn't matter. The paper trail was enough. By the time Nancy's trial began, she faced 15 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, 1 count of criminal misappropriation of funds, and 2 counts related to unlawful surveillance. I didn't need to testify again. The prosecution had more than enough. The verdict came down in early spring. guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 14 years with eligibility for parole after 9. The judge called her actions a textbook case of authority abused for personal gain, cloaked in the language of service and accountability. The HOA was officially dissolved 3 weeks later by a majority vote. In its place, the neighborhood formed a voluntary civic committee, a rotating group of 5 residents, none of whom served more than 12 months at a time. All decisions were made by open ballot, and every dollar spent was posted to a shared online ledger. They asked me to join the first rotation. I declined. Instead, I spent the summer rebuilding my garage workbench, replacing the warped planks and finally finishing the brake job I'd started the day all this started. The gate at the entrance still stood, but it no longer had a motor. The neighborhood voted to leave it open permanently, a symbol of what they'd been and what they refused to become again. One afternoon, as I was loading tools into my truck, Deanne stopped by. "We're naming the new community garden after you," she said, handing me a flyer. "You probably won't like it, but it's already printed." I looked at the paper. In bold, cheerful letters, "The Abbott Commons a place for growth." I laughed. I replaced a brake pad and sent an email. "You all did the hard work. You lit the fuse," she said. "Sometimes that's the most important part." She left, and I stood there for a while, watching the kids ride bikes down the middle of the street, no longer worried about being fined for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Someone was grilling a few houses down, and the smell of charcoal drifted across the block. A neighbor waved. I waved back. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours again, and this time we were watching.